What if America fought Russia in Ukraine? It's been almost a week since Russia began its unprovoked attack on Ukraine after weeks and months of buildup. All the way back in October, President Joe Biden was informed by his national security team of the grim plans Putin had to invade and start what would potentially go on to become the largest war on European soil since the Second World War, and maybe even World War III. The world has responded by placing harsh sanctions on Russia, which has severely damaged the country economically, and many countries have been sending military aid and weaponry and financial assistance to Ukraine in order to help them defend themselves. In terms of sanctions being imposed on Russia, there has been asset freezes for the largest banks, debt and equity restrictions on critical mining, transportation, and logistics firms, and there has even been quite a huge effort to shut down access to some of the technology that is critical and key for the Russian military and the industrial sectors. Also, just a few days ago, the US, the European Commission, along with France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, and Canada announced that they would be expelling certain Russian banks from SWIFT, which is the high-security network that connects thousands of financial institutions from around the world. Many world leaders have emphasized that these are not the last of the sanctions should Russia continue on its war path it's on right now. In terms of financial and military aid, the United States specifically has responded by firstly directing that $350 million through the Foreign Assistance Act be designated for Ukraine's defense. President Biden then instructed the State Department to release up to an additional $350 million worth of weapons from US stocks to Ukraine. The Pentagon has also said that weapons, including anti-armor, small arms, body armor, and various munitions, will be sent in order to support Ukraine's frontline defenders, and a State Department spokesperson said that these arms also include anti-aircraft systems, which Ukraine is said to have specifically asked for. It is said that over the past year, the United States has committed more than $1 billion in security assistance to Ukraine, and while that is great and very helpful, many people are wondering why the US hasn't sent any troops over. Firstly, despite Ukraine's desire to be, at this point in time, they are not a member of the NATO alliance. The US has deployed thousands of troops throughout Europe, both before and during this invasion, and of the some 4,000 troops that have been deployed, they've had their tour of duty extended, most likely for several weeks to come. These troops are not there to fight the Russians, however. These troops are there to help defend and support the NATO countries that lie around Ukraine. President Biden has explicitly said that they are there to support, quote, our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East. As I made crystal clear, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. But he has also said that US forces, quote, are not and will not be engaged in a conflict with Russia in Ukraine. This, of course, leads us to the question of what scenario would have to arise for the US to engage in this conflict with Russia directly. There has to be one, right? Ukraine borders the NATO member countries of Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania, and if Russia were to threaten any one of these countries, the United States, along with France, Germany, the UK, and the rest of the NATO alliance, would be required by Article 5 of the treaty to respond accordingly. Article 5 is what guarantees that the resources of the whole alliance can be used to protect any single member nation. The first and only time it has ever been invoked was in the aftermath of the September 11th, 2001 attacks on the US. This is what led to NATO allies joining in on the invasion of Afghanistan. It's important to look at a similar situation that has happened in the past, and that is the 1990 invasion of Kuwait by Iraq. This was a war of territorial aggression, and the next year the US and an allied coalition intervened in the war with the support of the United Nations Security Council because, of course, they were against this invasion. It's not the same situation, but it's fundamentally comparable to the one that is currently ongoing, and it makes us ask ourselves, why did the US get involved in that war but are extremely opposed to this one, especially considering how Ukrainian leaders have been pleading for Western assistance? Well, my friends, while there are quite a few things that aren't similar about this invasion and the previous one, the most important is that Saddam Hussein did not have nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, has about 6,000 of them. It's the same sort of logic that made the Cold War what it was. It's this idea of, if you're going to destroy me, I'll destroy the entire world while I go down. Russia's huge arsenal of nuclear weaponry makes intervention riskier than ever before, and it makes the situation all the more precarious. Throughout this conflict, I learned about what political scientists call the stability paradox, and it's how Putin was even able to invade in the first place. Basically, it's the idea that nuclear arms and wanting to deter using them is actually a paradox that makes regular or traditional warfare more likely. Like in this case, Putin knew that because of his nuclear capabilities, that the United States and other allies wouldn't necessarily come to Ukraine's defense directly, because intervening comes with the imminent threat of nuclear warfare, and no leader is willing to take that chance. This has given Putin the confidence to feel as though he could succeed. I mean, he even said it himself. During the very beginning of the invasion, while on TV declaring war, he declared that, quote, anyone who would consider interfering from the outside will, quote, face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. This is the most thinly veiled nuclear threat I've ever heard. The United States is extremely powerful when it comes to nuclear arms, but so is Russia. In fact, it is estimated that between the two countries alone is 90% of the world's nuclear arms. There is no guarantee that sending US troops to Ukraine would, without a doubt, result in nuclear warfare, but it is highly likely and a risk that, at the moment, the president is not willing to take. It's not an easy decision by any stretch of the imagination, because there are reasons why America and the US need to care about this war, but when your nation's safety is on the line, the stakes couldn't be higher. This war is a threat to democracy, it's a threat to the rule of law, and it's a threat to the things that the United States really stands for and has throughout its history. Moscow has no legal basis to insist any portion of Ukrainian land or territory, and if the West begins to accept Russia's claims, it undermines the sovereignty of all countries. And is this the precedent we want to set, where other nations can gain more territory through military force? It's important to remember that other countries are watching to see how everyone reacts to this conflict. I'm not suggesting that the West has just been silent and ignoring the problem, because I don't think that that's true, but it's just important for us to remember why we should care. We see these things on the news and it's easy to remove ourselves from the situation, but this war is not just about Russia and Ukraine. It will have ripple effects throughout the world. If the US were to send in troops and nuclear warfare was to ensue, there's an interesting thing that would happen, or rather, it's a terrifying thing. Both countries have second strike capabilities. This means that either side, should it receive a devastating blow, would still be able to retaliate. This is because both Russia and the US have what is called the Nuclear Triad, which means that they have bombers armed with nuclear bombs, submarines equipped with nuclear missiles, and land-based missile launchers. This means that whatever country were to strike first, they could completely demolish military bases and high population centers, but they could still receive a retaliation hit because of submarines that are out at sea that have nuclear capabilities. You get what I mean? So between the two countries, sending a nuclear strike almost guarantees that you're going to receive one back. This is exactly the reason why it seems as though President Biden is adamant on not getting involved in Ukraine. The only way that it would seem plausible for the US to begin a conflict with a nuclear power such as Russia is if the US homeland was at risk and it was done to protect them. The United States, along with many other countries, continues to pledge that it will help Ukraine defend itself, but as of now, people are not prepared to take the risk unless things continue to escalate. This is, as always, a rapidly evolving situation, and anything could change at the drop of a hat. Unfortunately, we all just have to wait and see what unfolds.